Good evening. I'm coming at you pre-recorded in glorious 720p because hard drive space. And I'm going to attempt to re-record me talking about very briefly a very condensed account of the historical development of what I like to call American Greek Orthodox liturgical music. So here goes. As I mentioned before in my video about attending a Divine Liturgy, I wasn't expecting this, but there was a mixed choir accompanied by an organ. And so that's how I found out they use organs. And I didn't know a whole lot about Orthodox sacred music before then, but it didn't take me long to figure out that I'm sorry, what was I saying? I didn't know much about Orthodox sacred music before then, but I knew enough to know that I wasn't expecting to hear an organ. So this practice developed over the last century, and maybe a little more than a century, where in the Greek Orthodox Church, they adopted the use of organs. And in America at large, Orthodox Christians from Eastern Europe and the Middle East adopted American accoutrement to put in their churches, like pews and American-style stained glass windows, and in some cases organs, because they wanted to be American and they didn't want to stand out. So I think that had a lot to do with the influence there. Also, around 100 years ago, Orthodox communities in America, including the community that became St. George Greek Orthodox Church in Greenville, rented space from another church. In the case of St. George, they rented a chapel from the Episcopal Church in town. And there they were exposed to pews, kneelers, and a pipe organ. And I'm pretty sure that happened in a lot of places besides Greenville. Now, I don't know exactly when or to what extent they began using organs, but that would have been their first regular contact with them. So maybe I can speculate a little bit that they began using them to give the choir pitches or for practice or something like that. Also, about 100 years ago, maybe a little more, Archbishop Athenagoras liked organs and was not opposed to having them in church. In Greece, he installed, or permitted to be installed, an organ at the Church of St. Spiridon, and that actually caused a little bit of a stir. If I'm not mistaken, he was actually sued over that, and he defended his argument by saying that in Constantinople they had a pipe organ at Hagia Sophia. And I know almost nothing about whatever kind of organ they had at Hagia Sophia or how it was used, other than that I've heard it was there. And I'm guessing it would have been used for imperial processions or something like that. Because even in the West, 1,000 years ago, organ music was very conservatively used in churches. It did exist centuries before the schism, but it was very limited in its use, and I guess conservative is a good word to use. Eventually, in the West, I guess I'm going slightly off topic here, the practice of hymn accompaniment developed, and I think that's actually a Protestant development. Although in the Catholic Church, before the Reformation, organs were used for accompanying what would otherwise be plain chant. And even today, liturgical music in the Catholic Church that uses organs doesn't require a large organ or a very large registration. And if you visit Catholic churches, and I used to tune pipe organs, so I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, a very large organ isn't required. So moving on just a little bit, after this incident in Greece with Archbishop Athenagoras, he ended up going to America and became the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church in America. And at that time, and this is also my speculation, that maybe some practices were already beginning to evolve or develop, and then someone who is fond of the use of organs came along and only encouraged it to develop some more. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing that basically what exists in America is kind of a unique American practice of using organs in Orthodox churches, but it's still pretty controversial, especially outside of the Greek Orthodox Church. Although I do think I can say that it is not an exclusively Greek practice. There were other churches that also used organs, and just about everybody in the middle of the last century was adopting American, as I said earlier, American accoutrement to furnish their churches. So even if they didn't have organs, they probably still had pews. A lot of that has fallen out of favor since then. I've been to an Antiochian church that used to use an organ in their church, and when I visited there, they had it in a storage room. It was an old Hammond. And speaking of old Hammond organs, St. George has an old Hammond organ in their basement. Let me see here. Boy, if I got $1 every time I said I think I could make $1 million. I'm sorry, I got distracted. It's really nice out today, and I like pipe organs. So let me try to salvage this really quick. The Antiochian Church, St. Michael's in Louisville, used to use an organ. It was a pretty small affair, and I think it's a Hammond spinet organ. I don't know what model it is. It's not a B3 or anything like that. And they pulled it out. They don't use it anymore. All right, so where am I going from here? So what I'm trying to say is that that's not an exclusively Greek practice, but I do think that I can say that the Greeks have retained these practices more than other groups. And honestly, I think it's kind of cool that there is kind of a unique American, kind of Greek American practice. And as long as I don't know, I would be totally okay with having a real organ in church, but I'm not really crazy about electronic organs. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But I'm going to save that for a separate video. I just wanted to somewhat briefly describe my perception of the historical development of American Greek Orthodox Church music. That's what I'm going to call that. So thank you for patiently enduring me.